Welcome to the Honest to Goodness podcast,
where we promise to be more than honest
and point to His goodness.
All right, today we have on with us a very special guest. She is University of Illinois women's head gymnastics coach, Nadalie Walsh. And Nadalie is a 3-time NCAA Regional Coach of the Year. She has been a collegiate coach for 23 years, and 7 of which have been at U of I.
I'm in my 8th year.
In her 8th year at the U of I, and she is author of cultural development and mental training book for coaches and athletes called Enough. She's also a wife and a mom to 3 adult children, and her love for the Lord and raising up prophetic families is one of the many reasons we wanted to have her on today. So with no further ado, welcome to the Honest to Goodness podcast, Nadalie.
Thank you, Tessa. We're so excited to have you.
So excited.
I'm happy to be here. I'm like, this is your gig, and it's just fun to be in the room and get an opportunity to talk to you all.
We are so excited. Well, we have a fun icebreaker question for you.
Yes. Okay, Nadalie, we want to know what your Starbucks order is.
The one sitting right there?
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of a cheater order. I've learned this from my athletes, actually.
Okay.
It's really great. So
share us.
You go and you ask, well, I like decaf. So it's a shot of decaf espresso, and then I bring my own core power, which is a protein shake, and pour the vanilla core power in, and then you have the shot of espresso. So it's like $2.65, and yeah, it's great.
What?
And then you get 26 grams of protein.
And then do you ask for like additional ice in there?
I just ask for it in the big cup.
Okay.
So
that's like nugget
if
ice
this
in
is
there.
all we learned today, thank you.
You're welcome. No, it's great. You can do the like if you want mocha, then you do the chocolate core power.
Oh.
Yeah. And if you could really do any protein shake. But it's just great because sometimes I feel like I don't get enough protein in the day. And then I think they learned it on TikTok.
Okay.
I actually, when you were saying that, I have seen people do that. Like, especially like fitness, more like fitness accounts. I've seen that. So it's all coming together.
Dunkin' doesn't do as good because when I ask them to do it, they give me a cup of ice and then they give me a cup of espresso. So I'm trying to get them to learn the whole process.
Wow.
That's
Well,
awesome.
Thank you.
I love
That's
that.
going to be my next order.
Okay, so we learned a little bit about you from your bio, and you're a BA when it comes to being a boss, right?
Yeah.
But tell us something about you that was not in your bio.
Well, I've lived in 4 different states. And so just our life of coaching, and I feel like our life has to be ministry in all the different places that we've been. But grew up in Wisconsin, moved to Indiana, and then Utah, and then Illinois. And so, yeah, I would say that wasn't in the bio.
That wasn't in the bio. So I have gotten to know Nadalie over the last couple of months, and it's so funny because we had known each other. We went to the same church for a long time, and we knew of each other. And I would say, for me, I can only speak for myself, but whenever I would talk to somebody that knew Nadalie, they'd be like, you got to meet Nadalie Walsh. You guys would like totally love each other. And there's so much that you guys have in common. And for whatever reason, for 7 years, we never connected until more recent. So it has been such an honor and such a joy to get to know you. And so I knew that whenever we came back this season, I was like, I've got to have Nadalie on the podcast because you are such a wealth of knowledge. And like, I tell the girls all the time, I'm like, she's a storyteller. Yeah. And that's like, I think all of us love stories, but I specifically love a good story because I just relate so much to it. And I feel like it makes it so much more practical when you're trying to navigate hardship, to like hear from somebody else's experience and hear how they went through things. And so I'm so excited to dive into this topic today of raising prophetic families, which has been sort of like I don't know if the right word is unspoken ministry, but that's kind of been a passion of yours as you've raised your 3 kids, right? Like just speaking life over them and into them and teaching them the power of encouragement and loving others well through encouraging them. And so I would love for you to speak more into like what life has looked like for you in raising your kids and how you have learned, I guess just like along the way, how you have learned to steward this gifting over their lives. And yeah, just kind of dive in.
Yeah.
Wherever you want to start.
I think just first of all, just when people say like a prophetic family, it
Yeah.
can sound like such like a churchy word or something that can be really like far reaching and unattainable. And I would just say that it's more like raising your children to hear the voice of the Lord for themselves at a young age so that they can like walk into their destiny instead of standing in a room and never really knowing what their destiny is. And so just early on, like our kids, they're pretty young. Maybe I'll share a little bit about that. They were pretty young. So I had 3 under 3 years old, and my husband's name, well, yeah, it was great. It was great. No, it was great. I don't remember any of it. No, I'm just kidding. No, they were little, and I would say once our little bit older, well, I guess Aiden was 3, and then Ireland was 1, and Valiant was just born. And I just remember we did a lot to just expose them to being in groups with prayer and being part of people praying for people and praying for healing. And just, we didn't ever feel like that ministry was something that was to be separate from the kids. We felt like they should really be involved, be around. And that was kind of the beginning of my husband and I's process of like, we feel like it's really holy to have the kids in the room. And so often church thinks, it's adult church and just put the adults in a room and put the kids somewhere else. And so we kind of adapted this mentality that like their spirit, they're born with the same spirit that they're going to have all through the life that they're living in these bodies, and that spirit gets transformed into their next body. And so the more they can be saturated in it, the more that they can actually walk in it and learn to talk in it. And so just with kind of going back to your question with raising prophetic families, we just made it a priority to make sure that we were teaching them how to hear the voice of the Lord for themselves. And that came in a lot of fun ways. It wasn't always mystical or difficult. It was, I could give 100 examples. Yes. Maybe we'll get to that. But just teaching them that they can hear and then honoring what they are hearing and believing that what they're hearing is God and not dismissing it. Because I think if we dismissed it, then it would make them question if they really heard it.
So I remember I was in one of your workshops this past fall for raising prophetic families. And you talked about discipline. And how in order to teach your kid how to hear the voice of the Lord, you have to teach them to listen to your voice. Am I getting that right? Yeah. Okay, can you talk about that a little bit more and how the Lord really convicted you on that, specifically about discipline and being done in love?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In raising our kids, we adamantly felt like they have to hear our voice, they have to listen the first time. And God would say that to me. He'd be like, if they don't listen to you, and you're the voice of authority in their lives, and they can see you, they can touch you, they can hug you, they can hit you when they're mad. Like, if they can't listen to you, how are they ever going to listen to me when they can't see me yet? And they can't hear me, feel me yet. And so from little on, we trained them in kind of like controlled environments in some way. As a parent, I think it's really easy to do the discipline when you're already fired up yourself. Like that's a surefire way to make a lot of mistakes, which I made many of them. But we did a lot of like controlled environments, like putting the crawling child on the floor and setting out items that they could touch and ones that they couldn't, and just teaching them the word no.
You shared with this example of what you did. Share that, like what you put on the floor.
I mean, when Aiden was little, no, don't arrest me. No, we would put like a toy, maybe a rattle, a burning candle. Maybe there was like a knife over there. We put things down, and when he would start to crawl, and we'd say, "No, like you can't do that," and he'd look back, and then no, and it just taught him, okay, this isn't for me. My voice of reason, my voice of authority is celebrating when I go over towards the rattle or go over towards the other things. And then we didn't baby proof our house. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Yeah. I don't want anybody to feel guilty just because what we did doesn't mean that it has to be done that way. But teaching them no helped them to understand it's not, oh, you can do that later when you're big enough to rebel. It's you're learning right now in the here and now to these are the guidelines, these are your boundaries, and the boundaries actually display love.
So good. Yeah. That is so good.
So Natalie, you said that you have several examples you can share of how you taught your kids how to hear the Lord's voice. So can you share some of those with us?
Yeah. I'm a pretty creative person. And so if you want me to make a spreadsheet, I will fail. You give me some construction paper and something more colorful. And I think that I thrive more in the area of little kids. And so we did a lot of crafts and things like that, but they were more like activations. And so, all right, kids, we're going to trace all of our hands and cut them out. And now I want you to ask the Lord, who needs healing? And let's make these little hands have a name of somebody on them. And then we would trace their feet, and then that would be, who do we need to pray for? And they would write down the names on the little construction feet. And then we would keep those. And then it would be all right, kids, everybody get together, reach in, pull out whatever, 5, lay the footprints down, and let's walk a path. And all right, so who's God telling you to go pray for next? And listen. And then they would step to, oh, it's grandma, or step over to my Auntie Stephanie, and just little, they sound so silly, but they were intentional. And I think that intentional telling them hey, we're going to do this activity and we're involving Jesus. Things like on Easter, we would hide a basket and they would be told, you're going to go sit on the couch and you ask the Holy Spirit where it is. This is not about the present. This is not about the gift. This is about Jesus. This is about Jesus, and this is about the Holy Spirit. And He will tell you, because He wants to be part of this process for you. And it was amazing. The first couple times my husband and I did that, they most definitely would get up and go to the exact area where their basket was. And they would look in the couch. They just wouldn't look under the couch, or they would get so close. And it was so fun to be able to tell them, you heard Jesus, you heard the Lord. You just, when you got there, you didn't remember that you can ask Him the next question. And in adulthood, we do that all the time, right? Yeah. We get there and then we forget to keep asking Him. We think, oh, I've got it figured out. Yeah. So, and those are a couple examples.
Really good, Natalie.
So I feel as we've said the word, prophetic and prophecy a couple of times. And I think that for some people listening, that word might be a little, like you said, mystical. It might feel a little bit off-putting for people that, I grew up in a church that they didn't teach the gifts of the Spirit. And so I had no idea even what the gift of prophecy was. Can you explain to our listeners, in the most basic form, what is prophetic ministry within, and why is it important, and how do we use it?
I think that the listener wants to know that prophetic ministry, it's all about encouraging people, and it's about seeing what maybe isn't there yet. It's calling the gold out in people, in your kids or in your coworkers or whoever. It's being able to see a behavior and be Lord, what is actually going on? And then tap into what heaven says is the reality. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times what we see isn't the actual reality of what heaven wants people to be walking in. Does that make sense? Yes. And so with a prophetic ministry would just be listening to the voice of the Lord to encourage other people so that they can step into who they are really called to be, even if they're not behaving in that way yet.
Yes.
So do you think everyone has the prophetic gift?
I mean, in the scripture it says above all, desire the gift of prophecy. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have love, then you have nothing. Yeah. And so it's so important that we don't, in my opinion, I think that going after the prophetic, it's a beautiful thing, but really that cannot be the first thing. No. Because being able to see the gold in your kids when they are driving you crazy and they're not listening and you feel like you're failing, but being able to really ask God, what is going on in them? Why are they doing that? And finding a way to spin it in a way that is encouraging. Mm-hmm. You literally can change their entire path and their trajectory just by seeing what God sees, even though it's not actually in full manifestation yet. Mm-hmm.
That's so good. And I feel that's something that was really highlighted to me recently as I talked about it in one of the episodes that we did recently about just how love is the first thing that we need to be chasing after. And Paul then goes on in the next chapter to talk about the spiritual gifts and how you can have all the spiritual gifts, but if you don't have love, then all of it is meaningless, basically. It's not fruitful, and we have to have a heart posture of love first in order for the gifts to be Him working through us, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So, okay, what are some of the things that you do? Well, you kind of already touched on this, but as the kids got older, what are some ways that you encouraged them? You know, you talked about being creative and like doing the crafts with them as they were really little. But what about for the families that are, you know, kind of stepping into this now and their kids are a little older? Maybe they're in middle school, high school. Like, what are some things that they can be doing right now to practice using this gift or like hearing the voice of the Lord?
Yeah, I would say I remember.
Share your stories too.
Yeah. As well, I'll kind of go to like the middle school-ish stage. My oldest son, Aiden, he was probably like maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I would get him like a Nerf gun, and he would take this Nerf gun. And first of all, I'm gonna back up. Like, we didn't have a lot of money, and so like it was a big deal for me to go to the store and get him this big gun, and I probably shouldn't have done it at that point, but it was one of those times where I was like, I just really want to, I love to give gifts. So, and my husband's like, how about a smaller gift budget? But anyway, so with the Nerf gun, I remember getting it for all the kids and they just had fun with it. But I walked by Aiden's room and he's sitting on the floor and the entire thing is completely taken apart and it's laying all over the ground. He took every little like pin and piece of plastic and completely just, to me, destroyed it. And I just remember being like, Aiden, and there was so much in me that want to be like, what are you doing? I just bought you that. Don't you know how much I spent on that? And I didn't have to do that. I could have used my money on something else. Like all these things were like kind of going through my mind. And I just remember feeling like the Holy Spirit just say like, be quiet. Mm-hmm. And I just said, Aiden, nice. Okay. And I just kept walking. I didn't know what to do in the moment. I remember just thinking, I need to walk away because I'm going to. I know. But it was definitely me learning to listen to the voice of God for me. But he really, really told me, like, don't say anything or you are going to ruin everything, is basically what I felt like he was saying to me. And so I just kind of like let it go. And the Lord talked to me a little bit about like, it's not your son's fault that you bought this thing and now you're stressed that he wrecked it. Like, that is separate. You need to make sure that you are accountable to your choices. So what he's doing with the choice that you made is now his choice. So you have to make sure that you don't project your feelings onto him because he's not doing what you would have wanted him to do, which is play with it the way that the like designer designed it. Yeah. So I go to the kitchen and I am like doing dishes or something like that, and I get pelted by this like little Nerf whatever foam bullet, and I turned and I was like, oh my gosh, Aiden, that hurt. And he goes, I put it all back together and I modified it, Mom, and I made it go super fast. And so I changed this thing and this thing, and when I put these things I think I was kind of blanking in listening to him because I didn't even understand like first of all, how did my 9-year-old put together this gun again, because it was demolished, and how did he put it together in a way that is actually even more functional? And so I was able to celebrate that with him. And so if I would have crushed his little spirit in the time of what he was doing, then he wouldn't have done that. And he wouldn't have probably wanted to come and share that little victory with me. Yeah. And so like fast forwarding to him in his late teens and his early 20s, like he literally has patented ideas of how you change engines in different machinery, and he has patented these things to where he is now selling he's 23 and he has a international business selling his product because he invented a way to make it more simple and to make it cheaper so that more people can use it. And so I hear that and I see that and I'm like, wow, God, that was a pivotal moment. And so I think my encouragement to families is like, you've got to make sure you are not mixing up your emotions and projecting them onto them. And then also, like when I saw that in Aiden, I knew how from that point forward how to pray. It was like tucking him in. I bless you, Aiden. You're gonna be an inventor. You're gonna change. You're gonna like change things. You're gonna make things better. Like the Lord's blessed you with this ability to have this intentional mind that is really intelligent. And I just always like I prophesied over him that he would do these things. But if I wouldn't have noticed what he was doing as a child, then I couldn't call out and speak into him all the rest of the years in order for him to hit it in adulthood.
It's like that faith in action. Like when you partner those two things together, like what the Lord can do with it is beyond our wildest dreams, right? Like, but we have to partner our faith with our action.
Yeah. I think too, was it you tested that shared that Nadalie was able to see kind of the gifts in her children from a young age to foster, like in all of your children.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember going out when we lived in Utah. We drove out to Bethel Church and went to a lot of different conferences and things like that, just because Utah was a little bit of a drier place, which was great for our individual, like, spiritual growth. But it was so nice to leave and get refreshed just from a different location. And one of the days I felt like the Spirit was like, go buy an easel and a bunch of canvases and painting stuff and bring it home. And I was like, okay. And it's really inconvenient to make a mess.
Yes.
It's super inconvenient.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, well, you're mixing all the colors. And I like giving up control, right? Like giving up control and just following, like, okay, God said to do this. And that literally launched my daughter into a long now career at 21 years old. She is
an amazing artist,
selling paintings and across the whole
Gosh.
world. And it's really awesome to see how that wasn't for all of them. Like, the boys did it too. They painted their little feathers or whatever they painted that day, but everybody as a family did it. But she really took to it. And I kept the very first thing she painted, and it was a lion. And still to this day, she's still on her Ireland Gwen Instagram, GWYNN. You can just see lion after lion that she's continued to paint. Well,
if you go to Natalie's house, they have like ginormous canvases of lions, like of her, just the face. Like, you think of like Aslan from Narnia, like that's, but like so beautiful, and that's what she paints, which I think is it's such a reflection of how she sees the Father. You know, so cool. Okay, so how would you say that, I mean, you're kind of speaking to this, you're kind of answering my questions as we go, but like specifically, how has this gift and like dialing into this and really being intentional about, getting into this with your family, how has it changed the way that you parented? And in your husband too, Victor, like how were you guys always on the same page when you parented this way? Or was it like you had this, this conviction and you brought him along with you, or like, how was that dynamic?
I think that we always were on the same page, but we had to like surrender the control of expecting each of us to do it the way that we did it. And I think that's like an important piece. Like, when I would be with the kids, maybe mine was more craft related or things like that, but maybe for him, he was just being a good father. And when they would make a mistake, he would get down low and he would look them in his eyes and say, no, we don't do that. Like, just really coming down to the kids' level and being consistent. I would say we were really on the same page. Like, it is inconvenient to be at a restaurant and your child is throwing the food and your child is screaming and crying, and they're kids, they're going to do that. Right? You're like, oh, I'm getting ready for it. He's going to do it soon. But like, ultimately, the consistency of being the same mother and father in the home, in the car, in the church, in the restaurant, we were really on the same page with that. And I think that the big reason the discipline is so important, it goes back to the fact that like they have to listen, but they also have to learn the self-control. Because in the gift of like prophesying or encouraging people, like, just because you get something from God doesn't mean you have the authority to speak that out. Like, you have to have the ear to hear, the eyes to see, but also the self-restraint to be able to wait until God says, now's a good time to tell them that. And sometimes it's not even yours to give either. Yeah. Like, sometimes you have to know that you're getting something from the Lord, but it might not be for you to give. Okay, so what would you say is one piece of advice that you would give to our listeners that are wanting to grow in this area with their family? Like, not like speaking to the ages or stages, but just like in general, where would they start? I think it always starts with you believing that you hear from God too. And I think sometimes as like the adults, we don't need to perform for it. We can just sit down with God and say, hey, what do you want to tell me today or right now? And just like the way I do it a lot of times is I say, Dear Nadalie. And I just start writing myself a letter, and I just trust that whatever is coming out is coming from the Father because he wants to talk to me. And so I feel like if families want to start raising their families to hear God more, then starting some intentional little sitting down and write yourself a note. Or even, I think the enemy is like really cunning in the way that he tries to really attack people in the way of like their identity, even more so their identity, just insecurities. And so as families, if families are very honest and like vulnerable and transparent, and you share your sins and you share your struggles with each other, and when your child comes to you and they say, hey, like, I looked at porn, don't overreact, call the gold out in them. Or they say, I cheated on my exam, you have to like hear God for like, okay, they did this. The opposite is true of what they're doing. So like, what is the truth here? And so just being able to make sure as in a house with kids, you have to be the protector of removing shame, like all shame. So whether it's pornography or it's theft or it's alcohol or it's sex or whatever it is, talk with your family and talk age appropriately, but make sure that they know that you are the safest place and that you will not overreact to them, and you will not like, you're such a loser. Like, why would you do that? You're a disgrace to our family. It's like, those are the things that the enemy wants you to say. And if you can have the self-control to just stop and not overreact, then when you are in a crisis situation, you can actually be there for your family. I've been in many crisis situations. My family is not perfect. We've had many ups and downs, but when the downs were happening, we could come together as a family and we could actually be there for each other and help like usher them out of that valley instead of like forcing them further into it because they feel not only the guilt from what they did, but the shame from their family. Is that too big of an answer?
No, that's so good. And actually, it reminded me of a story that you told me once about when Ireland got into a car accident, and like in that moment of crisis, when like you got to the scene and she was lifeless. I mean, you described her as basically being dead. Like, and you speak to that, like how, you know, you got onto the scene, you came upon your daughter who was, what, 17 at the time? And she was lifeless in front of you, yet you had like this peace about the situation. And instead of freaking out, instead of, you know, like speaking all of these things like, oh my gosh, what happened? You know, what are we going to do? You know, she's dead, whatever. You just started what?
Yeah, my husband and I, we had that knock on the door. The panicked person at the other side of the door just said, Ireland's in an accident, you need to come. And so jumped in the car, drove up on the scene. And when we got there, her car had like launched, flipped, rolled, and she was in the seatbelt, but like pinned, hanging, like the driver's side was up. And so she was hanging upside down, and she had been in the,
She'd been there for a while.
She had been there for a while. And so we don't exactly, she remembers seeing things flying around when the car was turning and crashing, but then there was a point where she just wasn't really there anymore. And when we got there, the police officer was pulling her out of the car, and she's like 5'7" and very like thin. And so the cop just like looked at my husband and just like handed her body over to Victor, and Victor just crunched down, and it was like snowing, and just crunched down and held her. And he's like, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. And like, we just prayed. And for me, like, I'm a coach. I'm trained in CPR and all of those things. Never once did I think to even like do that. It was, I don't know. I just felt like I just called over every promise I could remember that I've ever spoken over her life. Like, we have a book, and anytime somebody would like pray over our kids and it resonated, or it was some sort of word of encouragement or prophetic word, I would keep them and write them down. And I just started speaking those over her and just pray. I don't remember the words that were coming, but I just knew that I wasn't going to partner with even the, like there was nothing in me that wanted to partner. It was like, no, honey, you're okay. You're this, remember, you're going to do this. You're going to the nations. You're going to go to the nations. That was, you're going to feed by the word of God. You're going to take it to all these different places. And just the things I could remember in the moment.
She wasn't even conscious. She was completely,
No, it was probably 20 minutes of her, and there was lots of fiascos with the ambulance not showing up, and we did all the things medically. We didn't just sit down and we're only going to pray. Like, no, it was call 911. It was get the emergency
And they
people.
didn't come.
No, they got a call to come, and then they got a call saying she was fine, so they left. And so it was like 30-40 minutes before
Anybody showed up.
anyone got there. And so we just prayed and prayed and spoke life over her. And then at one point there was a big like a big gasp for air, and then her body started like convulsing, and she ended up having once the ambulance came, they took her to the hospital. There was not a scratch on her, not a broken bone, not a...
And they did all the tests, right? And they're like, there's nothing.
Everything. They did the scans, the CT scans, the MRIs, and there was literally nothing wrong with her physical body. The doctor came out and said, well, she has these 2 abrasions on her thumbs. We think it's from holding the steering wheel. And I was like, no, I made her rake the other day. She had to rake. She had blisters from raking. So, but yeah, so she'll forever have the story of knowing that like her life was definitely spared and protected. And for us as a family, when I drive on that road, I don't feel panic or fear. It's like a place of rejoicing. I drive on that road almost every day. It's not that far from here. And it's just, that reminds me like there was not even death could come against what God has for her. And so, yeah, no matter what your listeners, whatever you are going through or walking through, get the perspective that Jesus has, because his perspective is going to be good and it's going to give you life.
And it's going to be life, right? I just feel like that's so important. Like something that we often partner with is the spirit of death or the spirit of anxiety or the spirit of fear, whatever that looks like. And it's powerful. Like our words and actions are powerful in the spiritual realm. And that's not to be weird or, again, mystical or any of that, but like just to like emphasize that it is very real, like how we participate in our lives and how we participate within the spiritual. Like it's very real. And I just love that you have those examples. Not that I love that you had to go through that, but like that you have those examples, because I know that for me, it has helped helped me tremendously walk through different areas of my life where I'm like, you know, one of the first conversations I ever had with you, Nadalie, was like, I was talking to you about my son, my second oldest son, and how I was just struggling with understanding him. I was struggling with understanding him. I felt like I never understood him. And you just started asking all these questions about him. And all of a sudden you were like, does he like Monopoly? Does he like climbing trees? And I'm like, how do you know all these things about my son that I've never told you? And you're like, oh, I don't know. I just felt like he might be a little bit like my son, Aiden. And it was just like, then what you shared afterwards about just like the importance of like pressing into those things that he loves, even as a 9-year-old, he's 10 now, but like how important it is, like you said, with the whole breaking apart the Nerf gun, like letting them step into what they are naturally wanting to step into and not holding them back because it goes against maybe what you're comfortable with. You know, it goes against what you're, like what, I don't know, how you would want to raise them. Like it's messy. It's, you know, expensive or, you know, what if you'd put that Nerf gun together and it, you know, broke? But like you have to let them have those trial and error experiences because they're literally doing what they were created to do.
Yeah.
So it's just so beautiful. I mean,
and there's always resistance. I mean, the more you start to figure out who your kid is and you speak life into them, and the enemy is going to try to come and make the exact opposite happen. So you just can't partner with the doubt. You have to keep the faith. Like my youngest son, Valiant, he's a football player. He's been the sports kid his whole life, and he had broken his arm when he was second grade, and then ended up having a really bad football injury where he broke his humerus, like off of his shoulder, rods and everything. And it's like at that point, he still wanted to play football. As parents, we could partner with fear. Like, I don't want you to. We want to protect you. We don't want you to get hurt again. This isn't a good thing for you.
Yeah.
But his heart was he wants to play football. And so he's now playing football in Division I, and he had to have 3 more surgeries through that process. And sometimes it's hard to look your child in the eye and be like, I don't know why God didn't heal you right now, but I do know that whatever comes against you, we're going to be with you, and we're going to walk you through these multiple major surgeries, and you're going to come back. But like ultimately, for me with Valiant, it's like he has leadership on his life.
Yeah.
He needs to play football because he needs to be in a room full of 110 other football guys that can watch the character and the principles that God has inside him. And so I have to relinquish the control of if he plays and gets touchdowns, or if he's on the sidelines. No matter what, God has ordained him to do that. And so if I would have partnered with that fear, then I could have not like ruined the whole plan, because God's not like a cruel joke kind of God. He has many ways to get to where he's going to take your kids. But I think it's just really good to remember that fear is a liar. So if fear comes at you with your family, you have to make sure that you're rooted in the faith.
So good. So good. Well, in closing, would love for you to share a favorite scripture or Bible verse that you cling to.
Yeah, one of my favorites, and it's not so much like in parenting or in leadership, I think it's just one that I want over my heart, is 2 Chronicles 16:9, where it says, the eyes of the Lord search to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeking the heart that's like completely his. And I just want that. And I remember getting saved as like a 17, 18-year-old and not really knowing very much about God, but I knew I wanted to follow whatever this thing was. And I remember asking a friend of mine, like, well, how do I know if it's God? And they just said, well, if you hear something, go with it, because like radical faith will bring radical obedience, will bring radical results. And so I just have always wanted to be the person that God looks at my heart and he can see that it's completely his. That doesn't mean I do everything right. It doesn't mean X, Y, Z or A, B, C. It just means my heart's yours, Lord. And whatever happens, I'm going to keep my heart being yours. And I just hope that he can see that as well.
I love that. Oh, well, I thank you so much
Yeah.
for being here, for choosing to spend your, what day is it? Wednesday afternoon with us. And I cannot wait to hear how people are blessed by this episode. So thank you for being here.
Thank you to both of you for inviting me. It's been so fun.
Of course. All right, till next time, guys. Over and out. Okay, so really quickly before we end the podcast, I wanted to reference really quick the book that Nadalie wrote. It is called Enough, and it is a guidebook / workbook for coaches or anybody that's in leadership positions. And it has it's geared towards a more secular audience, but it has godly principles woven throughout, where it follows a lot of scriptural and biblical principles, right? Okay, so if you are interested in getting that book, it is on Amazon and anywhere else? Amazon. It is on Amazon. It is called Enough, and by Nadalie Walsh. So run now and grab it.